All right. Well, welcome back, everyone, to another Third Thursday. It's hard to believe it's September already. We only have a few left for this year, but I'm especially excited today to have Angela Sanders joining us. And she is coming to us from Oklahoma. And Angela and her husband, correct me if I'm wrong, do you and your husband serve at the state convention or just Todd?
No, just Todd.
Just-
No, I'm self-employed, yeah. Have
Okay.
my own ministry, yeah.
Yes, so Todd and Angela but have been doing localized church ministry together for about 30 years.
Yes.
And, um, and she's a wife, a mother, a grandmother, if you can believe it. She does not look like it. But she has 30 years experience working with teens and youth ministry. She's written many of the teen Lifeway devotional series that come out. And so I'm excited to have her today to be talking about girls ministry. So
Yay.
Angela, tell us kind of how you got into girls ministry.
Okay, well, a long time ago, I think it's 2002 or so, Todd was the youth minister in our local church, and we have always been just linked arm in arm in any ministry either of us undertakes. And so we were on a mission trip, and I was visiting with some of the girls, and we'd had a great time just sort of over to the side. And one of the girls said, I wish we could do this all the time, like without the boys. And for some, I mean, I'd heard them say things like that before, but for some reason, this really resonated in my heart, and the girls were serious. And I sensed that it wasn't just casual conversation, but more of a heart cry. And so those girls and I got together and prayed about the direction that the Lord would lead us. And what we landed on was a girls' ministry, a formalized girls' ministry. You know, I mean, we hopefully anyone who's doing youth ministry is doing girls' ministry if they're addressing the needs of the girls, but they needed something formalized that was just for them. And we started with 13 girls per week in the program that we developed and ended up running over 130 per week. We had girls getting saved. We had faith families, which to me means you lead this person to Christ, they lead someone else to Christ. They, you know, five deep, and it was just the Lord really blessed it. And so it's been a heart cry of mine ever since. Girls ministry, you know, paying specific attention to girls and their needs and addressing the challenges that they face. So that's just kind of where it started, was from the girls that we worked with.
Yeah, that's interesting, I think, because especially when you think of youth ministry and like youth ministry events, they're kind of geared towards the guys. Like there's
They
always
can
the
be,
Nerf
yeah,
dodgeball and the Nerf and how
yeah.
much food can you eat and how much candy can you
Right.
shove in your mouth and all of those
Hmm.
things. And so why tell us, like, a little bit why specifically a specific girls' ministry? You touched on it a little bit with about meeting their specific needs, because
Hmm.
I think girls and youth are the same, but man, girls and boys are very different.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. And I think there's a little bit of hesitancy for some people when you mention girls' ministry because they think it means rainbows, pink, butterflies, flowers, all of that. But a lot of the girls that I've been in ministry with over the years would actually kind of run from something that looked very specific like that and stereotypical to girls. They want to be seen as individuals who are just as called and just as equipped by the Holy Spirit to do the things that God's given them to do, and they want something of substance. And so I think any ministry that meets the needs of girls is girls ministry, but a formalized girls ministry is going to do that in a way that takes into consideration the nuanced challenges we face as girls, as women later on. And so girls ministry itself is the work. It's meeting their needs. Formalized girls ministry is going to be the structure that supports and facilitates the work in a way that's sensitive to those nuanced challenges. So I think it's really important for us to pay special attention to what the girls are going, you know, what they're going through, the needs that they have, not because what they need is something lesser or lighter or lovelier. And I think that's the stereotype that I was describing with the flowers and butterflies and all of that. They don't want fluff. They don't want necessarily anything pretty because life is not pretty. Not that that can't be a part of packaging and, you know, some of the things that you do, but that shouldn't be the sum total of what you offer them is just something prettier or lighter or whatever. They want to know how to live this life that they've been given to live, which is increasingly difficult in this culture to navigate life as a young woman, and to become a woman that represents the Lord in a responsible and intentional way later on. And so I just think it's really important for us to grab a hold of the fact that these girls have needs that may or not be met in the way that young men's needs might be met. I know that men come together around activity, and women tend to come together around conversation. And those very specific differences. There are other differences, of course, but I found that when those girls were talking to me, what they were trying to say is, we need to talk, we need to process, and not to run our mouths for the sake of running our mouths, but we want to get to the meaty things. And it might be fun for us to do the, marshmallows in the mouth thing or whatever, or to play dodgeball. I was not a sports girl completely. Anything that was gonna, paintball, if it's gonna hurt, I didn't really necessarily want to do that. But I did want to get together, and I wanted to talk about scripture. I wanted to talk about the way that I was feeling. I wanted to talk about the decisions that I needed to make, which again might be the same kind of decisions that the boys in our youth group needed to make, but we might have some additional challenges or some nuanced challenges, such as like cultural expectation to consider that really I couldn't talk about in the same group as a bunch of the boys. And so that's what the girls were telling me is something that I'd experienced, and I think is pretty universal among girls. Did that answer your question?
No, absolutely. And I think I kind of grew up in the Baptist world. And so when I
Hmm.
hear girls ministry, I think act teens and
Yeah.
things like that. And so what are some, and I know like it is typical when you hear girls ministry, you think they're all going to be sitting around painting their nails and,
Yeah.
putting, cucumbers under their eyes and things like that.
Yeah.
But, so when formalized girls ministry, I feel like if the youth leader is a male, I guess
Hmm.
maybe two questions. So if
Right.
the youth leader is a male, how do they, just do girls ministry? And does that mean they need another staff person, another female? Do they split youth group? Like exactly what does it look like? A formalized
Okay.
ministry.
Okay, for a formalized girls ministry, I would say that if you're the male on staff and you don't have a girls minister to dedicate to this, which I think I mean, we live in a state where we have 1,800 Southern Baptist churches plus, I think, and if I'm thinking correctly, we only have fewer than 10 churches that have a girls minister on staff. So the youth minister is the girls minister. So what are they supposed to do where they are not giving more time to the girls than their general audience, whole youth group? I would say, first of all, what they need to do is get together a think tank, a group of people that don't have to necessarily be women. I think dads of girls, there are all kinds of people that could be on your think tank that could help you be aware of the needs that you're facing with the girls and what they want. You can poll the girls. You could have some girls on this team, and then I think that I would let leadership know that you're thinking about doing something special for the girls and what that might look like in your mind. Then get with the think tank, and in my book, which I think we'll talk about in just a minute, it leads you through the 4 phases of girls ministry: the dream phase, the build phase, the lead phase, and the improve phase of girls ministry. In the dream phase, this is what we're talking about right now. I would get a group of people, make sure you're on the same page, do a little vision casting of your own, let them know what it is that you're thinking, what you're trying to accomplish with girls ministry, and then you would bring them alongside you, talk to leadership. When you get the okay, then that think tank becomes sort of your planning team, and they can help you come up with what's actually plausible. What I would suggest is that you don't want your girls ministry to ever compete with your youth ministry as a whole. So let's say, and I just want to jump aside, you mentioned men that might be entering this conversation and considering having a girls ministry. There also might be some women watching this that think, oh, I can do girls ministry. I'm not the youth minister, but I can do girls ministry. I want to be very careful about cautioning people. If you are going to take on a ministry like girls ministry, you need to understand that it comes under the umbrella of youth ministry as a whole, and nothing that you do should ever take away from or compete with the youth ministry as a whole. And if you have in your mind, even on a heart level, where you would never articulate this. Oh, this is a place where I can have some control or maybe do things my way. Whatever. That's really not the motivation that you want. And I would say maybe back way off of that until your goal is the same as the youth ministry as a whole, and that there's nothing in you that wants to compete with leadership. We always want to, be unified and come under authority. So, but if let's say that you get all of that worked out, you're in line with the youth minister, or you are the youth minister, you want to do this thing, try to find a way that it can either fit into your existing structure or could add to without putting too much on your girls' plates. The last thing you want to do is add something that's going to end up excluding, because it demands time that most of your girls don't have. Like, for instance, with us in our girls' ministry, we had a church-wide emphasis that included that was an opportunity for all our teenagers to come to, which was an evangelism training and emphasis. We chose to have that time because one of the main goals we wanted our girls ministry to have was evangelism. We took that church-wide time and broke off during that time to have our weekly girls ministry meetings, because we didn't want to, like, for instance, if you only meet together as a group, I know there's one church at least one in our convention that only meets on Wednesdays. Well, you don't want that to be a segregated time. You would need to find another time in church programming or something completely separate where you could meet and accomplish your goals and intentions. And anytime you plan something for girls ministry, it should be a supplement to something that feeds the youth ministry as a whole and contributes to that feeling of unity and that unified purpose and direction. So if you have calendar events in your youth year, like you have DNOWs, you have camp, you have, whatever it is you have, you don't want to take away from those load-bearing walls in your youth ministry. You maybe just want to add to, or it may be that you need your own girls retreat that's not the same as a Disciple Now weekend. I don't know if you all have those where you are. That's very much a big deal here in Oklahoma. So I would never tell someone, hey, do something for the girls separate from the boys here, because this is something that they need to do together, but maybe have something that is similar that's for the girls at a different time.
Yeah.
So I would definitely encourage the men who find themselves contemplating the idea of becoming also a girls minister. Don't be intimidated by that. You are very much a leader in their lives, and there's no reason that you couldn't speak into or even do the teaching or, be involved in all of their events. We have a girls ministry event coming this Saturday statewide, and we encourage all the male leaders to come. We want them to come. The last thing we want is for girls to see the men dropping them off, like what they're doing isn't as important as if boys were present. That's the very last thing that you want to communicate to the girls. So don't shy away from it. Show the girls that you think that they're important, and that the nuanced challenges they face, that you're determined to help them face those challenges and inform their decision making. Whether or not you have any personal experience in that, you're going to pull together a team that's going to help you do that.
Yeah, I think that's amazing. And you kind of started to touch on this a little bit, and it feels like this is a good time to kind of drop into those
Yes.
4 phases of girls ministry. The
Mm-hmm.
first one you said was dream, and you kind of talked about a vision statement. So maybe take us through the next 3 phases of that and what that looks like.
Okay. Okay. And yeah, after you've completed the dream phase, and I just want to emphasize here that when you're in the dream phase, a truth to remember is that all things are possible with the Lord. We tend to, as soon as God gives us an idea, give him reasons we don't think that idea could work, and kind of like defeat ourselves before we begin. But the dream phase is only for brainstorming. It's for dreaming up and remembering that the one that's going to equip you and enable you and empower you and guide you through this whole process is God himself. And so he has no limits. And so in the brainstorming phase, although we have to live in reality, we have budgets to deal with, we have a very real calendar. We're bound by time. He's not, that we have to deal with. You don't do that in the dream phase. And a lot of your dreaming is done about not just the things you will do, but the culture that you want to create. In other words, instead of saying, hey, we could do a girls' retreat, we could do a Bible study, those should not be your first thoughts. Your
Mhm.
first thought should be more about, how do we envision the girls in our ministry interacting with one another? What kind of relationships do we want them to have? What kind of things do we want them to be learning? Who do we want to be leading? How do we want the girls to lead out? How do we want to reach girls in the community and get an image of your head of what would that look like when our ministry is up and fully functioning the way that we think that the Lord wants it to? What will it look like? What will it feel like? When a girl walks in the room, what will they see? What will they hear? And that's the kind of dreaming you want to do. And then you flesh it out later. When you're talking about the build phase, that's when you actually start making a plan. That's when you take this vision that you've dreamed up, with your think tank or whoever you have, your maybe church leadership, whatever avenue you choose to follow. You take all of that and you go, okay, now if that's where we're going, let's walk that backwards. What does that look like? And what does that look like now? What does that look like 6 months from now? What does that look like a year, 2, 3 years from now? And then that's going to be in your build phase. And you're going to be actually planning both short-term and long-term goals. And you're going to walk it back to even what do we need to be doing right now to make these things happen? What do we need to be doing right now to look ahead? And you're actually laying out a plan. You're taking all the things that you brainstormed and you're not throwing away any of it because, like we said, all things are possible with the Lord. And what you can't do right now, you might be able to in 3 years. When we started our girls' ministry, what we could do week 1 was not what we could do by the end of year 2. By that point, people saw what the Lord was doing and they were like, how can we help? And all these people with resources we hadn't even thought about were coming forward with, you can use this, I can give that. That wasn't possible at the beginning. So you don't want to throw out anything from the dream phase, but you want to say, what can we honestly, realistically do right now without rocking the boat of the youth ministry as a whole, to come alongside the other programming, the other volunteers, whatever. And you start making a plan in the build phase, and you're going to let your church know what's going on. You don't want to do that too early because when people start looking for something, they have their own timeline in their head, which may not be the timeline that you have. So once you have a plan and a timeline and you know when it's the right time to let the church know what you're doing, you're going to start recruiting volunteers in the build phase. And I think that recruiting the volunteers is maybe one of the most crucial aspects, recruiting and then also training your volunteers, which really the training part comes at the end of the build and at the beginning of the lead part. But you need the right people in there. And you need to involve as many people as possible. I think that a lot of times in youth ministry, we get into the habit of, someone says, I can be a youth worker. And we think, can they teach? Because we've got this model in our heads of a youth worker needs to be available to do everything. And so we want to make sure they can at least teach because we want kids learning truth. And then the rest comes. Well, you need to think more in terms of diversifying and using people's natural gift sets. Like you might have someone who's all about administration, but they don't teach. Fantastic. Find a place for them. If you have someone who only teaches and doesn't do that, maybe you have someone who's gifted in hospitality or someone that just has aesthetic abilities that would love to come and decorate your space. And, you recruit those volunteers intentionally for their gift set, for their talents, abilities, and resources, but even more importantly, with their commitment to the Lord and their godly characteristics that they demonstrate, because whoever's involved in your girls ministry is going to rub off on your girls. And if you invite volunteers in that have really bad habits, gossip, or they're in competition with one another, or they don't follow through, all of those are things that we're basically, by involving those people, asking the girls to watch and emulate. Otherwise, why would we have them? And once you have a volunteer, finding an exit ramp for that volunteer can be very difficult once they're there. So it would be better for me, I would think, and whoever's watching, if you are your only youth worker, or maybe like you're the youth minister and you're like, I'm the whole thing. Great. Don't add people just to add them. Add them as the Lord brings them to you. Maybe start praying about it now, but it's better to start with a few or even one that's fully committed to submitting to the Lord's leadership in every way in relationship to this girls ministry than it is to find people to do all the things. And if that means you can't do as much in your programming at the beginning, so be it. Pray for the Lord's timing, pray for the Lord's provision. And as he leads and as he guides and as he gives you new volunteers, maybe then you're able to add and grow. And that is actually one of the tips in the book is don't add more than you can continue to do. It's better to add slowly what can be done well than it is to try to do everything. And you definitely don't want to do anything just because the people down the street are doing it or because you've seen it done. In the dream phase, hopefully you have assessed the needs of your girls, and the things you've dreamed up will meet their needs, not the needs that are being met by somebody else somewhere else that don't have your girls. So back to the build phase, you get your volunteers, and you make sure that they're in the right spot. Sometimes you have to fill temporarily. You let those people know it's temporary. But then you move on to the lead phase, and then it's time to launch, and it's time to actually start. I think the lead phase for me is when, okay, I'm not an athlete, but I picture runners on a track and the gun has been shot. No one's going to sit down and think about whether they're in this race now. It has begun. And so in the lead phase, it's a lot about making sure that you stay true to the vision, stay true to the mission statement, make sure that you have an effective girls ministry, that you're not just doing one to do it, but that it is gospel driven, that it's Bible based, and that it's including all the girls, making every girl who walks in feel like this is just as much for them as it is anyone else, and maintaining relationships in such a way with your leaders and the girls that shows that that's a priority for you, treating everyone the same, making sure that you are doing everything that you would ask from your workers. It's about being a good leader, modeling everything that you would want your leaders to model for your girls, and everything that you hope would eventually show up in your girls' behavior. Not making excuses for yourself in any way. Sometimes I think we can fall into the trap of, well, that's probably okay in this instance. No, we are constantly 100% committed to being obedient first and foremost to the Lord and the instructions that he gives us in his word for how the body's supposed to behave together. That's all in the lead phase. In the improve phase, that's all about evaluation. You definitely want to work into your calendar year times when you can expect to evaluate yourself. Leaders can evaluate themselves. You can evaluate each other and make sure, hey, we are on track. Because more than any of us wants to feel good about what we are doing, we want to make sure that we're doing what God put on our heart to do. And so evaluating, going, how can we do this better? And then closing the loop, implementing those changes. In the book, I think that's a thing that a lot of ministries skip over, is the improve part, because they feel like just the word itself is uncomfortable, thinking about being evaluated or having to have maybe potentially a difficult conversation if something needs to change with someone or with programming. So they just say, okay, we've started this thing. This is what we do. The problem is every year, the culture in a group changes with every graduating class and every new class that comes in. Sometimes you have things that happen in the community, school-wise, whatever, that can change the dynamics. And if we're still doing 3 years from start what we were doing in the first year with no changes, odds are we haven't been honest about something. And we really should be more fluid and more adaptive to what's going on in the community. Make sure we're actually doing girls ministry, meeting the needs of the girls in our ministry. So evaluation is very important. And just because we started something doesn't mean that we have to keep doing it that way. Once we evaluate, we actually need to sit down and do the dream, build, lead phases all over again. Using what we've learned from our evaluations about individuals, but also about the programs and events that we do, to make sure that we are constantly growing and improving and letting the Lord not that we ever want to tell him no about anything, make sure we're staying in that mind space. And so that's a ministry loop that not a lot of people are comfortable with, but it's absolutely necessary if we want to remain effective. So
Yeah,
that's in a nutshell. I could talk about this for hours. I'm trying to stay on track.
No, it's good. I think that last phase is important because too, when you say improve, it means it also sounds like you're not doing something right. And nobody wants to say, oh, I'm not doing it. I'm not doing this right. But no, I think it's good. And I love in the book, I I didn't even say the name of the book. The book is called Growing Ineffective Girls Ministry from the Ground Up. And it has all those
Yep.
phases in it. And I love the little workshop sections that are in there where
Mhm.
you kind of pause and there's questions to reflect upon. So you walk them through all 4 phases, and then like they can literally just use this as a handbook as they get started in
Exactly.
girls ministry.
Yeah. I
Um,
wanted it to feel like I was actually there with them in their meetings. Because if they're starting a girls' ministry, they probably have never had these meetings before. And it may be that in their normal youth ministry, they've never done things this way. So I wanted it to be like they had had a guest consultant in that would go, okay, do this, then do this. And of course, they're going to adapt it to their individual needs. But yeah, that was the heart of it. So I'm glad that you touched on that.
Yeah, and I think you said it earlier, and it's so true that people be like, "Let's have a girls' retreat." And so they kinda start off with, "Let's have this event," and then they
Hmm.
kinda work backwards. But what are some things you have seen in starting a couple of girls' ministries from the ground up?
Hmm.
Like,
Hmm.
what are the benefits to the youth group, and then what are the benefits to the church at large of having a girls' ministry?
Okay, well, to the youth group, I think a lot of times, because for the reason that you hit on, and I hesitate to say it, so I'm glad that you said it because a lot of youth ministry programming does seem to be geared toward more stereotypical boy interests. And so, for us in both cases where I got to build this, um, girls ministry served as an entry point for a lot of girls that didn't feel comfortable coming to youth wide events, but they had their one female friend that was involved, and they would come with her to be around other girls. But when you add boys into the mix, it just adds a different element. An awareness, maybe a self consciousness that some girls have, and the way that they interact when boys are present is different from the way they interact when they're not. And we found that girls were way more cohesive with one another and much more interested in what each other had to say and how each other were feeling when the boys weren't there as a consideration. Not that they're a hindrance, it just shifts the dynamic. And so, because it was a more comfortable space, we had more visitors enter our youth groups through girl visitors enter through girls ministry events and weekly meetings than we had any girl guests show up for youth wide events. And so once they became connected to our girls ministry, then they started to get involved in our girls ministry as a whole. And so it was very much an entry point there. We also found out that because our girls' relationships with one another were strengthened that way, they were more genuine, they were deeper because they weren't trying to maintain surface level conversation because they were guarded around the boys. It got deep really fast. So
Yeah.
they knew each other better. And so it was a stronger community within the community as a whole. It also meant that when the boys were added, those girls' female relationships weren't as shaken. They were more consistent. It spurred our boys to want their own extra thing. And so, where they may not have been as committed to do an extra thing before, they were. And so then that just increases their involvement. And I think there was just a stronger sense of identity in our girls that gave them confidence to lead out in ways that they might not have otherwise. We, in both of our areas, we had girls who would step into leadership roles after being mentored toward them, like could teach maybe after being trained how to teach one of the lessons and lead a small group. Well, they may not have gotten that opportunity in large group as soon, but because they had done this in girls ministry, they were way more bold and confident to go, hey, I can do that, and volunteer for things they might not have otherwise. And when they got up to do them, they knew what they were doing. And again, the whole spur one another on, when the guys saw that, they wanted that too. So it worked really well that way. Church wide, I think, was the thing that surprised me the most, but was the most exciting. We had our volunteer base because I mentioned that we had in our first church, and the reason I keep going back to the first church is not because I think it was necessarily more successful there, but because that's the model that I included in the book. Um, when I said we were running about 130 per week, that was equal to, or maybe a little bit more than we were running youth group wide on a Sunday morning. That's why it's significant. So we had our normal youth ministry base volunteers there, and it was a very set group. by the end of the 2 years, because of the structure that we chose and the model that's included, I don't think we have time to go into all of that, but we had so many potential volunteer positions and we tried to involve so many people in the church. I think it probably tripled or quadrupled our volunteer base. Not just for that, but some of them got so excited about what was happening in girls ministry, they wanted to teach Sunday school, or they wanted to go to camp, or they want people who'd never done that before. But we did try to. I had read a statistic before we began that about how many adults it takes in a young person's life for them to be adequately cared for and invested in spiritually before becoming an adult independent outside the youth group. And the number was 6. And I thought, wow, most youth ministries don't have that many adults that can pour in. So I wanted the structure to include as many potential for different adults to be in a girl's life as possible. And so we had people who did setup, we had people who provided meals, and they were not all the same people as the beginning. Like I said, we grew. We had people who led small groups, people who taught, we had secret encouragers, which that ministry, I thought it was sort of superfluous. I wanted it to be a thing where I knew they would come for meals. I figured they'd probably come more for a treat or a card or a gift or something. And my mother was a senior adult in our church at that time, and she said, "I wish I could be involved. I just can't do this." And I thought, this is something mom could do. And so she became a secret encourager. So every girl got a secret encourager every semester. And those secret encouragers, boy, they took that job so seriously. They prayed for those girls. They left them little notes of encouragement, sometimes tiny gifts, and we had a very low dollar amount. We wanted everyone to be able to do this. And then they would meet each other at the end of the semester. I reassigned them the next semester. That part alone, what was supposed to be an extra volunteer, position, if a girl stayed in all the way through, she would end up with 12 adult women in our church. And again, this is a accident. It wasn't an accident to the Lord. It was a surprise to me that they would pour into. And so I would see after the second semester, I would notice that these girls at church who had met their secret encouragers and then had 2 of them, they were being late for church, which you don't want to be late for church, but they were late for church because they were chit-chatting with senior adult women in the hallway. And
Mhm.
so there was an excitement like church wide about, have you heard what's going on with the girls? And no, how can I be involved? And then after a while, I didn't really have to recruit volunteers because they were hearing about it from their friends. Whole Sunday school classes were getting together and talking about, like, hey, I'm doing this. You should be an encourager. I didn't have to recruit. And so, my pastor at the time in that first church, Ted Kirsch, he was always very, very about anything that had evangelistic purpose. And that was our number one purpose behind this was, gospel advancement. And so when he saw in whole age groups of the church, all the age groups getting involved in one evangelistic purpose in such a unique way, he got super pumped about it. So I think the benefits to the church were widespread. It also let people know that their gifting was valid. So we might not have people who would normally show up for an evangelistic event because they didn't think they had the gift of evangelism, which I think that's sometimes something we use as an excuse. We know that we're all ministers of reconciliation responsible for evangelism, but sometimes people sit those things out. But when they saw there was a different way you could approach evangelism or be a part of an evangelistic emphasis, they got excited about that. And then they got excited about, oh, well, then I wonder how I could use this other gift. I wonder how I could do that. And it empowered people in ways that went beyond the girls' ministry specifically.
Yeah,
So,
I think that's amazing too, and I think there's research and statistics that show us that, when students are leaving the church after 18 or whatever, one of the reasons they're sticking around are those intergenerational relationships being
yes.
part of the church, so, I can
Hmm.
see how that can just benefit the church and how truly it just makes lifelong disciples of the students who don't leave the
It
church once
does.
they become adults, quote, unquote, "adults." Um,
Right.
yeah, but this is amazing. This is great, and I knew, you had sent me the book, and when I flipped through it, I was like I knew there was a time coming soon where I was gonna be able to share it with everybody and maybe even have you on, which I'm happy to be able to do that.
So
Um,
good to be here.
yeah, so I'm super excited. The book is great. It's a very practical, hands-on book. It's very, very well written. I feel like I
Thank
read
you.
half the book in not a long time of sitting there. It wasn't like a, chapter book or anything.
Good.
But yeah, so speaking of that, I do have a copy that I will give somebody. They can like the video, and we'll enter everyone to get a copy of that. But I also wanted to, usually you can go on Amazon and buy the book, but this book is different. So tell us where they can buy that. I'll also put a link in the comments, but you can tell us about where
Okay.
it's located.
Yeah, it is actually only available through my website right now. And my website is angelasanderswrites.com. It's a sentence. So it's WRITES, just to be clear. It's not the other. So angelasanderswrites.com. And if you go there, you can find out a little bit more about what I do in general, but it'll also have this resource on the shop page. So actually, until the end of September, it's typically $30. It's on sale for 20. So, and there's actually, this is perfect timing, Chris, because if people pick up the book now and they read it and they get excited about it and they want to, build toward that, this is the perfect time calendar wise to be doing that if they wanted to have something in place in January, even if they decided to wait till late January. So this is actually perfect. But if they wanted to see what it's all about, just visit my website, angelasanderswrites.com.
Good. And if somebody has the book and they want to reach out to you for questions, can they do that through
Mhm.
the website?
Absolutely. Yes, and there's a contact button on the website. Um, and it's also, my email is just angela@angelasanderswrites.com. And I'm always fielding questions about girls ministry. It's not something that a lot of people do in a formalized way. They do some things that minister to the needs of girls. They may have some events, but structuring something so that it is an existing, ongoing, systematic, and strategic effort, you're going to have some questions. So I am here for those. Very happy to answer that, or even train your workers or whatever. I'm actually thinking about doing some YouTube videos that would be a little bit more like, hey, I'm here with you. Let me tell you some of the details or some examples. So, and that's just in the works. It hasn't happened yet, but that's how available I am. Yes, they can contact me.
Oh, good. Well, that's exciting. That's exciting. Well,
Yeah,
thank you so much for being with us today and imparting all your
absolutely.
wisdom on girls ministry. I wish I was that age again to be a part of girls ministry again, to be a
Yeah.
part of one of your girls ministries that you put together, or one that's modeled after what you have in your book. So, but thank
Yeah.
you again. And like I said, I will put the links to her website where you can get the book in the chat. And we will catch everybody next month. Thank you.
Great. Thank you.